First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me here to this conference, also in the light of this very attractive program and also in the presence of many distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. But to be honest, when I first received your invitation, I was quite challenged. I was thinking of not accepting your invitation because you were asking me whether I can give a broad overview about the interconnectedness between motor development and other developmental domains. Well, this is not trivial. Although I have written a comprehensive book, to bring the scientific knowledge with a good story to the audience is nearly impossible. So we had a back and forth, and finally I said, okay, well, let's do this. When I prepared that talk today, it came absolutely clear to me that the best entry point actually for that talk would be the Zürcher Longitudinal studies. Studies which I have the privilege to lead since about 20 years. These studies began in 1953 and span now 2 generations of children, of around 1,000 children from birth until older ages. The ZLS, the Zurich Longitudinal Studies, they provide us with really a unique window into the developmental arc of different domains of how children develop emotionally, socially, cognitively, from a motor point of view, and how obviously these different domains are intertwined. The ZLS consists of 3 cohorts. The ZLS1, which was started in 1953, the ZLS2 in 1970, and the ZLS3, the generational study, which are the offsprings of the ZLS1. So there are about 1,000 children. Of course, motor development has always been one of the focuses of the ZLS, and my predecessor, Professor Remo Largo, he has actually developed a battery out of the data set, the Zurich Neuromotor Assessment, which is central, obviously, to this talk because this is a motor audience. Of course, within this cohorts, we have also studied other developmental domains. From this knowledge, I've drawn results, some of the results in terms of associations between motor performance and other areas of development. You see here cognitive development, milestone, social-emotional development, gravimotor development, biological maturation measures, visuomotor development. If you review the correlations overall, we find that relationships between domains are relatively weak. But this does not mean that these links are unimportant. I think we all know, and you are here also to get more insights into this from the scientific perspective. We all know that motor development is extremely important for a number of developmental processes, for example, for socio-emotional processes, and also for children's well-being, obviously. This is also something I really know from my clinical experience as a developmental pediatrician. Motor activities are central for children. I think this fact becomes very clear in this very short film I show you in a couple of seconds. The commentary of this film are in German, but it's actually hardly needed because you will see the images alone really vividly show what it means when a child cannot participate.
Um das Leben auf einem Spiel- oder Sportplatz ein wenig zu ordnen, haben die Erwachsenen gewisse Regeln erfunden. Zum Beispiel, dass sich Kinder bei bestimmten Spielen selbst ihre Mitspieler wählen dürfen. Kinder, die hierbei schnell ausgewählt werden, haben einen hohen sozialen Status und werden innerhalb der Gruppe gut akzeptiert. Ist die Zahl der am Spiel teilnehmenden Kinder ungerade, bleibt natürlich zum Schluss ein Kind übrig. Dies mag für uns zwar recht trivial klingen, aber für den, den es trifft, ist dies ein Moment akuter Ablehnung, der schwer zu ertragen ist.
So motor development is central, so that the children feel well. So let me now introduce you with the Zurich Neuromotor Assessment and what we actually have learned over the past, let's say, 40 years of data collection and data analysis. Of course, there are several hundred people were involved in developing the ZNA. And I would especially like to thank Tanja Kakebeke and Jonka Fleisch. Both colleagues are retired by now, but they have really worked a lot over the past years, also in the process of renorming the older data. I will talk a little bit about associated movements, a very important concept which we use in clinical practice. I also will talk about secular trends of motor development, about lifespan trends from age 3 to 80, about effects of body weight, and then I will finally sum up and come with some conclusions. So this is the Zurich Neuromotor Assessment. It's the only battery worldwide which you can assess motor development from age 3 to age 80. It includes fine motor, gross motor, balance, and associated movements. There is one study covering the whole lifespan from 6 to 80, a study of the Australian colleagues, but otherwise the analysis we did over the past years are quite unique. What we actually did is, and that was really very helpful, we had very, very close collaboration with our statisticians. So we applied, for example, highly innovative statistical techniques, such as the so-called poor man's algorithm, which was invented by Assis Couch and Valentin Roussan. This approach takes into account children and also older individuals who are unable to complete the task when we actually should measure performance. So you should integrate this into norm values. So let me show you a little bit what the tasks are. We have the PEC board. Most of you know this because this is something very classical. Most motor tests.
Und immer nur einen Stecker nehmen. Achtung, fertig, los.
Muss Lina das eigentlich auch machen?
Ganz das Gleiche.
Oh.
So we have applied this in 1,600 individuals from 3 to 80. And here you can see the centiles of the PEC board. You see a very rapid improvement during childhood, with a plateau starting about age 8, then a peak performance around 20 to 50, 20 to 25, and then followed by a gradual increase, especially as from 45 onwards. Notice also the gender difference. Females are a little bit faster than males. This has been described in many studies so far. Then here the beats.
Genau. Und jetzt die restlichen Perlen wieder so schnell du kannst. Achtung, fertig, los.
Der Geist ist weg.
So the beats and the centiles of the beats. Here is only childhood and adolescence depicted, but you see that the speed of performance increases rapidly up to about 6-7 years old. So fine motor development primarily takes place in, we call it Zyklus 1, so in kindergarten, and maybe the first 1-2 grades. And then fine motor development is more or less terminated. We see this in all fine motor tasks. And here the bolts. And here are the centiles. So some of you may say, well, where are the females? Or the males? There's only one curve. Yes, there's only one curve. There's no gender difference, interestingly, in the bolts. Maybe boys do more use bolts. We don't know. So you may have noticed the contralateral side that children have sometimes mirror movements. The so-called mirror movements, the contralateral movements, are involuntary movements of the body parts that are not actively involved in executing the task. We know that there's a developmental trend that younger children have much more associated movements than older individuals. And we also know that there are sex differences. Girls have much less contralateral movements or associated movements. You see here associated movements with the foot, with the mouth, with the head, whatever. I'll show you a couple of examples. Here, associated movements of the during the pegboard task. Score 1 means just a little bit of associated movements. Score 0 means no associated movements, and score 3 means quite a lot. So let's have a look. Just watch score 3 and 4, especially. And you see the girl with score 1 is already finished. Obviously, there is a correlation between speed and contralateral associated movements. Then we have a look into alternating hand movements. That's a pure motor function which actually measures neurological function, because it's actually just the precentral cortex and the pyramidal tract which are actually activated. We also have a look here, just focus on score 3, 4. Then here, a more complex even, that's sequential finger movements. And watch score 3. So that's really nearly mirroring the movement at the other side. So these are centiles. You see, most of the children, when they're young, they have such mirror movements, and then they vanish. But most importantly, not in all individuals they vanish. Some of us also have, obviously, contralateral associated movements or mirror movements. You see, there is quite a striking difference between the genders. It's about 2 years difference interval, which actually resembles the difference of growth during puberty. I think we can speculate that the less mirror movements make movements of girls more elegant than of boys. That's sometimes something we see, we feel, well, boys are kind of, way. Sometimes they move with a lot of associated movements. Of course, there is this gender difference. So what is the reason for mirror movements? The reason is that the neural network, not the neurons, but the neural network is developing in the course of the first couple of years with a peak at about 5 to 10 years, and then with a decrease in terms of synapses. So there's the pruning process during adolescence, and then we think that because the neural network is so dense, with so many synapses, the regions, the brain regions which are activated during a specific task are much bigger, much larger than when the individuals are older, when neural activation gets more and more specific to very specific brain regions. And of course, there's also missing inhibition or immature inhibition of the contralateral side. What we know is that a lot of synapses do consume a lot of energy. That means children with associated movements, they need a lot of energy, they get much more tired when executing motor tasks. So associated movements are kind of a measure of neuromotor effort, of energy consumption. So the reason is for these mirror movements that synaptogenesis is most prominent occurring at ages 4 to 12 years. Their very unorganized network is formed, and that this is visible actually in the associated movements. And of course, we still have immature insufficient inhibition. We could show this, that associated movements are quite nicely correlated with measures of executive function. So children with better executive functions have less associated movements. So these are the fine motor adaptive functions and the associated movements. We have a look at standing long jump, so at some gross motor measures. Here you see the centiles for standing long jump. What is very striking here is the growing gender difference starting at puberty, obviously, which is mainly related to the development of muscle strength. Here you find something sideways. That's interesting. We don't have a gender difference in jumping sideways. So these are the different tasks I've showed you. Since we have started the first neuromotor assessments in the 60s, in the 70s, and we have renormed the Zurich neuromotor assessment in 2020, we had the unique chance to look into secular trends of motor development in our battery. So if you talk about secular trends, you should also always relate the secular trends to the measure you're actually describing. So a secular trend means a long-term trend across generations. So if today's child performs better or worse in motor skills compared to a child 30 years ago, that's a secular trend. So it reflects more lifestyle and environmental changes rather than whatever a biological shift of the child itself. Here you see secular trends in the Saturn-8 1990 versus the Saturn-8 2020. We've published this in two years ago. You see, interestingly, the dots are the Saturn-8 1990 and the centiles the Saturn-8 2020. You see the backboard and some pure motor functions, and you see actually there's no difference in these two cohorts, so there's no secular trend. We've even expanded this in terms of pure motor tasks and backboard to the 70s, and you see here different studies, not only the Zurich Longitudinal studies, the Zurich Neuromotor studies, very different studies. And what you see is you see more or less a straight line, which means we don't see a secular trend in fine motor functions or in pure motor functions, which is reassuring. Okay, obviously there are some biologically very strong functions. But of course we see some secular trends. We see, and you see this here, secular trends between 1970 and 1920. So this is the average STS change between two cohorts born 10 years apart. And what you see here is, you see if the horizontal line is crossing the vertical line, it's not statistically significant. And you see, we know from the pure motor functions and the fine motor functions, there is no secular trend, but you see a clear secular trend in the gross motor functions, which importantly is not explained by higher weight. We know that BMI has increased over the past 20, 30 years, but it's not related in the analysis to that secular trend in gross motor functions, which may indicate that the reason for this decrease in the ability in gross motor functions is less practice, reduced physical activity, more sedentary behavior. So let's look into longer lifespan trends. What happens with these functions when you follow them into our ages, 40, 45, or even 60, 65? We compared motor functions in two populations in the Zurich longitudinal studies and compared them to age 18. So these are actually longitudinal data, but cross-sectionally analyzed. You see STS 0 means values of the age 18. And you see at around 45 years, most abilities remain relatively stable. Except contralateral-associated movements, they increase a little bit. Or increase, they get more. By 65 years, however, so within 20 years' time, the picture changes markedly. You see that you see a very pronounced decline in dB. dB means dynamic balance, so that's gross motor development. Also in fine motor, pure motor, and in balance, it's quite significant. So in average, it's more than 2 standard deviations decline between the 18-year-old and the 65-year-olds. So we have just published a couple of weeks ago centiles from 3 to 18, from 6 to 18 to be exact. And you see here repetitive hand movements. They're relatively stable. They've just increased a little bit. You see jumping sideways increases quite a lot. Associated movements, they also increase quite a lot. And balance decays in the course of development as the individuals get older and older. What we also did is we estimated peak performance. You can estimate peak performance. So you see in the first couple of years, there's a maximal increase, and the increase gets less and less. And at some point, it crosses that line, and the motor function declines in terms of performance. And you see here, this is the backboard of women at age about 30, something like this. What we have done, and this is a relatively complex figure, but I will guide you through, we find is that the peak performance is different in different tasks. The balance tasks and the balance tasks, they peak relatively early. You see yellow And the gross motor tasks, they also peak relatively early, between 20 and 25. So they're relatively early. And then the pure motor, they peak later. And the fine motor, they peak even later. The abilities, the functions, which mature early, they tend to stay stable. They tend to decay or decline also earlier, while those functions which develop later, they also decay later. So the first in, first out, the first in, first out, and yes, right. It's a complex concept, but it's right. We actually see this. We actually see this in many, in other functions too. It's an interesting concept we actually see here too. Well, what we also have done is we have compared the data, the Zurich data, with the only cohort we actually can compare with the Australian cohort. I mean, in Australia, they published in 2017 their data set, and we were lucky to get the data from the Australian colleagues. And we were able to see and to show they used actually very similar tasks as we did, and we were able to show that actually our data are relatively aligned. You see the long jump on the left side, the male's blue, the female's red, and you see there the Australian data is the dotted line. It looks very similar. And actually the pegboard, which actually they did it the same way as we did. And you see also a very similar line, a very similar trend. So this is actually quite fascinating that even if it's in a totally other continent, we find relatively similar findings, which mean that somehow motor aspects underline a general concept. Of course, we measured also individuals in terms of BMI, and this is the BMI effect of children. And you see in the upper two panels, you see the BMI set score on the x-axis, and the predicted fine motor and pure motor performance. And you see a horizontal line, which means there is in the fine and pure motor functions, there is no BMI effect. Obviously, if you just sit, it doesn't really make a difference whether you're more heavier or not. But you see in the standing balance and in the jumping sidewards, you feel that after about one standard deviation below the norm, below the average, you have a BMI effect which increases. The more the BMI gets, the more the poorer the performance is. And interestingly, and most importantly, and that's very important in terms of prevention measures of motor decay in the course of life, is that it really changes in the course of development. The older you get, the stronger the BMI effect is. This is it's nearly a continuous curve. You see at age 80, you see really a dramatic decay when individuals are heavy. So let me conclude with two conclusions. The ZNA is quite a unique motor test battery that covers ages from 3 to 80. It's quite exceptional in terms of coverage in this large age range. It was developed with sophisticated statistical methods, And what is very unique compared to other batteries, like the movement ABC or the BOT, is that we measure associated movements, which are very important for clinical practice. We know, for example, that children with autism or children with ADHD, that they show more associated movements than healthy children. So we can use it in part also as a clinical marker. The more severe a clinical picture eventually is, the more severe contralateral associated movements are. So that means associated movements are a neurological marker. Of course, they're a maturational marker also, but they're also a neurological marker. And we also actually see that in individuals, older individuals, that eventually associated movements increase again, which indicates that the brain starts to lose its integrity in the course of development, in the course of life. What we also see is that there is no secret trend overall except the gross motor functions. And that secret trend is not explained by BMI. And I think that's very important for us in terms of how can we prevent this very early? How can we work that children move, that they learn how to move? And I think that's one of your important aims you actually have with teaching children, with optimizing conditions in schools that they can really be active. And then I've showed you that although there is a weak correlation of different developmental domains in terms of motor performance, it is important and it should not be neglected. Then I showed you that performance is relatively stable until about 45 years. And then we see a clear decline. So this should be important for us all, but I think I don't have to say this in this audience. Stay active, be active. It's extremely important to stay healthy eventually. And sitting in front of a computer as a 65-year-old is not enough, obviously, because that remains stable anyway. So you don't have to practice finger movements, but you have to practice gross motor movements, because gross motor movements, they decline early. And obviously, we all have to focus on balance. We all have to focus on weight loss or weight stability to keep the weight stable so that we can slow down eventually motor deterioration. So we see this very, very clearly in our data. So again, I'd like to thank all the people who have worked with the ZNA. There are many people have contributed, especially also the cohort members of the ZLS. These are 3 individuals who participated. Well, next year we start the second wave of the ZLS at old ages. So we've seen them at age 65, and we will see them again at age 70. Obviously, the ZNA, the Zurich Neuromotor Assessment, gives us a chance to examine trajectories between 65 and 70. And of course, one of the ideas is to understand the factors during childhood which may predict the trajectories at that age. So the idea of the ZLS lifespan study is to understand factors during childhood which are critical and essential for aging. And I'm quite sure that there are a number of important factors, like, for example, movement, but also relationships, which are important for long-term development. Thank you very much. These are my books. My latest book, Miteinander reden, for the German-speaking audience. That's a book about communication between couples. But the Kindheit, eine Beruhigung is a reflection of childhood. Thank you very much again for your attention. Thank you very much for your invitation.